You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. The Veneziano casino did not sleep. It breathed. From the 42nd floor of the tower that bore his name in gold leaf, Vincent Calabrese watched the city below burn cold and electric, a desert lit like a wound that refused to close. Las Vegas at 3 in the morning was the only honest thing he knew. Everyone here was lying, to their spouses, to their banks, to themselves, and the lying was so universal that it became a kind of truth. He liked that. He understood it. He held a glass of Barolo he would not finish. He never finished anything that might dull him. "They moved the shipment," said Marco, his consigliere, standing at the edge of the office where the light didn't quite reach. "The Brunos are testing us." "The Brunos test everyone," Vincent said. "It's how they pray." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, and that was the thing people misunderstood about him. They expected the coal to sound like ice cracking. Instead, it sounded like a man reading a bedtime story. The Cold Hand. He had earned the name at 26, when he'd shaken the hand of a man who had betrayed his father, smiled, asked about the man's children, and then never, ever forgiven. There were people who said Vincent Calabrese had not forgiven a single soul in 19 years. They said it like a legend. He preferred to think of it as accounting. Debts in, debts out. The house always wins, because the house remembers. "There's another problem," Marco said. He hesitated, which Marco rarely did. "A journalist." Vincent turned, slow, and the city light slid across the hard angles of his face, the jaw that had been broken once and reset wrong so it gave him a permanent half-shadow, the dark eyes that had buried more men than the Mojave. "Name?" "Nora Walsh. Irish out of Boston, works freelance now, used to be at the Tribune. She's been pulling permits, financial filings, shell company records, 3 of our holding companies. She's good, Vincent. She's quiet good, the dangerous kind." "A woman?" "A mother," Marco corrected. "1 kid, no husband. She does this for a living, the Crusader thing. She put a Chicago crew away 2 years ago, 2 capos and an underboss." Vincent set the wine down without a sound. He was not a man who reacted. Reaction was a tell, and he had spent his whole life refusing to be read. But something moved behind his eyes, the way weather moves over water before you feel the wind. "What does she want?" "To bury you," Marco said simply. "Same as all of them." Vincent almost smiled. Almost. "Then she'll have to dig." 42 floors below and 1 block east, in the bones of the parking structure that fed the casino's loading dock, Nora Walsh was crouched behind a concrete pillar, with her heart slamming so hard she was certain the cameras could hear it. This was insane. She knew it was insane. She had told herself, all the way down the I-15, with Lily's empty booster seat reflected in the rearview mirror, that she would not do anything this stupid. She had a daughter, 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, who slept with a stuffed otter named Mr. Bubbles, and who would have no one, if Nora Walsh got herself shot in a casino loading dock chasing a story. And yet, here she was. Black jacket, press card zipped into her inside pocket like a sin she couldn't quite hide. the little Sony in her gloved hands, the one with the lens that could read a license plate at 40 yards. The story was that good. 3 years of work, bank wires laundered through a chain of laundromats and a string of low-rent wedding chapels. A senator's name on a guest list he'd sworn he never attended. And at the centre of it all, the spider. Vincent Calabrese, the man the FBI couldn't touch because every witness either recanted or vanished, or, in one memorable case, was found at the bottom of Lake Mead with his hands folded peacefully across his chest, as if he'd lain down for a nap. She needed one thing. One photograph of the man himself, in the room where the money moved. The private salon on the casino's mezzanine, where, her source swore, the books that were never shown to any auditor lived in a safe behind a Modigliani that was almost certainly stolen. The service door was where her source said it would be. The keycard her source had given her worked, which surprised her so much she nearly dropped it. The corridor beyond was cool and silent, and smelled of money. That specific casino smell of recycled air and ambition. She moved fast and low, up a service stair, through a door marked private. And then she heard the voices, and she froze, and she pressed herself into an alcove behind a marble pillar exactly 4 seconds before everything in her careful, planned 3 years of work life detonated. A door opened down the hall. 2 men. One of them she recognized instantly from 100 grainy surveillance photos. Taller than she'd imagined, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. Moving with the unhurried grace of a man who had never once in his life been in a hurry. Vincent Calabrese, in the flesh. She raised the camera with shaking hands. And that was when the 3rd man stepped out of the stairwell at the far end of the hall and lifted a pistol with a long black snout. And Nora Walsh, who had come here to destroy Vincent Calabrese, opened her mouth to scream. The scream caught in her throat. Time did the thing it does in the half-second before disaster. It thickened, slowed, went syrupy and unreal. The gunman fired. The suppressor coughed, 2 soft thuds that were almost polite, and Vincent Calabrese spun and went down against the wall, a smear of red blooming across the charcoal sleeve and a second flower opening high on his shoulder. The other man, the one who'd been with him, big, bald, a slab of a man, drew his own gun, and the hallway erupted in a stutter of muffled shots, and Nora dropped the camera and clapped both hands over her own mouth to keep the scream inside. The gunman ran. She heard his shoes slap down the stairwell. The big, bald man took 2 steps after him, then stopped, torn, looking back at his fallen boss. "Go," Vincent said. His voice was thin, but it was steady. Steady. He was bleeding against a wall with 2 holes in him, and his voice did not shake. "Get him, Sal. Go." Sal went. And then it was just the 2 of them in the long marble hall, the journalist and the dying Mafia king, and Nora Walsh did the single most irrational thing she had ever done in a life that her ex-husband had once described, not kindly, as an unbroken chain of bad decisions wearing a press badge. She did not run. She came out from behind the pillar and crossed the hall and dropped to her knees beside the most dangerous man in the state of Nevada. "Don't," she said, when his hand twitched toward his jacket. "Don't. You'll bleed faster. Hold still." His eyes found hers. Up close, they were not black, she realized. They were a brown so dark it only looked black, like coffee, like wet earth. And they were studying her with an interest that was almost obscene given the circumstances. The cool, total attention of a man cataloguing a thing he intended to understand completely. "Who are you?" he said. "Shut up." She was already shrugging out of her jacket. The shoulder wound was the bad one, high, near the joint, pumping in a way she didn't like. She pressed the folded fabric against it hard, and he made a sound, low in his chest, but he did not flinch away. "Press here. Press hard. You're not going to die. Do you understand me? You are not going to die in a hallway like an idiot, so press." "You're giving me orders," he observed. "Somebody has to." Her hands were red now. The smell of it was thick and copper bright. She tore the sleeve off her own shirt and wadded it against the arm wound, working with the brisk competence of a woman who had once done a year of nursing school before a journalism scholarship and a series of bad decisions wearing a press badge had stolen her away. "Stay with me. Talk. What's your name?" He looked at her for a long moment. Blood loss should have made him grey and slow. Instead, it seemed to have stripped something away, some habitual mask, leaving behind a raw and burning focus that was fixed entirely on her face. "You know my name," he said softly. "You came here for it." And that was when his eyes drifted past her to the floor, to the camera lying where she'd dropped it, and to the corner of laminated white that had slipped from her jacket when she'd torn it off. The press card. Nora Walsh, independent. Her own face, unsmiling in the little photo. For a moment, nothing. And then Vincent Calabrese began, impossibly, to laugh. It was not a nice laugh. It was low and broken, and it cost him. She could see the cost of it in the white at the corners of his mouth, but he laughed anyway. His head tipped back against the bloody marble, laughed like a man who has just been told the punchline to a joke the universe spent his whole life setting up. "What?" she said. "What is funny?" "You." He turned his head. There was blood on his teeth, and his eyes were bright with something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite delight, but lived in the country between them. "You came here to put me in the ground, Miss Walsh, to dig my grave with a camera. And instead," he breathed, a wet sound, "instead, you just saved my life. With your jacket. With your hands. Do you understand what you've done?" His voice dropped, intimate now, almost tender, and that tenderness was somehow the most frightening thing of all. "I owe people, Miss Walsh, and I pay. Every debt, in full, always. It's the only religion I have. And now I owe you. A life." He smiled, and the smile was terrible. "A life for a life. So I'll give you one, or, if you make me, I'll take one. But the ledger doesn't stay open. Not with me. Never with me." Footsteps thundered up the stairwell, Sal and 3 more men, and somewhere far below, the first thin wail of a siren that would be paid off before it ever reached the door. Vincent's bloody hand closed around her wrist, not hard, just sure. "Don't run," he said. "You run and they'll catch you, and they won't be gentle, and I'll be too busy bleeding to explain that you're the reason I'm not dead." His grip tightened by a degree. "Stay. I'll handle it." And Nora Walsh, 3 years of work, a 5-year-old asleep with a stuffed otter 40 minutes north, a story that could win a Pulitzer and end an empire, looked into the dark coffee eyes of the cold hand, and, God help her, she stayed. She spent the rest of that night in a room she had broken in to photograph, the private salon. The Modigliani, and it was a Modigliani, she'd have bet Lily's college fund on it, a reclining nude with that long amber neck and those blank, knowing eyes, hung exactly where her source had promised, and behind it, she had no doubt, was the safe. But she was not photographing anything now. She was sitting on a leather sofa, the colour of ox blood, with a glass of water she hadn't touched, watching a doctor who did not introduce himself work on the man she had saved. They had not let her leave. They had not tied her up either, which somehow felt worse. The casual confidence that she would not be foolish enough to try. The doctor, older, silver-haired, the kind of unflappable that only comes from years of patching wounds no hospital would be allowed to report, dug the second bullet out of Vincent's shoulder with a pair of forceps and dropped it into a steel dish with a ping. Vincent watched it fall with mild interest. He had refused anything stronger than a local. He sat shirtless on the edge of a mahogany desk, and Nora, who had been trying very hard not to look, looked. The body of a man who had survived, old scars white and silvered, a long one across the ribs, a puckered round one low on the side that could only have been a bullet. The topography of a violent life, written in flesh. And new blood, dark, sluggish now, being sewn shut with neat black stitches. "You did good work," the doctor said to her, not looking up. "The pressure on the subclavian. Where'd you learn that?" "Nursing school," Nora said. Her voice came out rough. "I dropped out." "Pity." Vincent said nothing, but his eyes had not left her since the doctor had begun, and the weight of that attention was a physical thing, a hand laid flat against her sternum. When it was done, and the doctor had packed his bag and gone, and Sal had taken up a post by the door like a granite gargoyle, Vincent shrugged carefully into a clean shirt that one of his men had brought and buttoned it one-handed, and only then did he look at her properly. "Marco," he said, "bring me what she had." Marco set the camera on the desk. Beside it, the contents of her jacket pockets, her phone, her keys, the key card her source had given her, and the little spiral notebook she carried everywhere, the one with 3 years of work crammed into its waterproof pages in a shorthand only she could read. Nora's stomach dropped through the floor. Vincent picked up the camera first. He thumbed it on with the ease of a man who understood expensive machines, and he scrolled through the images, the loading dock, the corridor, the half-second blur of his own face emerging from the door before everything went to hell. He looked at that one for a while. "You're good," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment, the way you'd assess a rival's hand of cards. This angle, the patience. "You waited a long time for this shot." 3 years, she said, because lying seemed pointless, and because some stubborn ember of pride refused to let her cower. 3 years. He set the camera down. He picked up the notebook, and Nora's hands curled into fists against her thighs, and he opened it, and he turned the pages slowly, and she watched the most dangerous man in Nevada read the document that could destroy him. He read for a long time. The salon was silent, except for the whisper of pages and the hum of the city through bulletproof glass. When he finished, he closed the notebook gently, almost respectfully, and set it down and laced his fingers and looked at her. "This would end me," he said. "Yes." "You know that to be true. You're not guessing." "No," Nora said. "I'm not guessing." "And yet—" He tilted his head. The bruise of exhaustion under his eyes did nothing to soften him. "You knelt in my blood. You could have let me die. Your problem solves itself, and you walk out the door with a martyr's story. I watched the cold hand bleed out and did nothing, and good riddance. Instead, you tore your own clothes to keep me breathing. Why? I don't know, she said, and it was the truth. And the truth surprised her out of her own mouth. You were just a man dying in front of me. I don't get to decide who lives. That's not my job. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. You have a daughter, he said. The air left the room. He'd read the notebook. There was nothing about Lily in the notebook, which meant Marco had told him, which meant they had been watching her, which meant they had been watching Lily, and a cold so total it felt like falling rose up Nora's spine, and she was on her feet before she knew she'd moved. If you touch her, she said, very quietly, and her voice did not shake, I will burn every last thing you own to the ground. I will publish from the grave. Do you understand me? Do you understand me? Vincent looked at her standing there, fists clenched, ready to die for a child he loved more than her own life, and the thing that crossed his face this time he did not hide. It was respect. Sit down, Miss Walsh, he said gently. I'm not going to touch your daughter. I'm going to make you an offer. No, Nora said, you haven't heard it. I don't need to hear it. The answer to anything that comes out of your mouth is no. Vincent rose from the desk. He moved like the wound was an inconvenience he had decided to ignore, crossing to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the city light and poured 2 fingers of something amber into a glass. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. He set it down on the table between them like a chess piece and sat in the leather chair opposite, and the easy patience of him made her want to scream. You broke into my casino, he said. You photographed a homicide attempt. My attempted homicide, which makes you a witness. And witnesses in my world have short and complicated lives. You're carrying enough evidence in that little book to send me to a federal prison until the sun burns out. By every law of the place I come from, Miss Walsh, you should already be in the trunk of a car heading toward a very deep and very dry lake. Then why aren't I? Because you saved my life. He said it simply, like reciting arithmetic. And I pay my debts, so here is how I pay this one. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, the freshly stitched shoulder held carefully still, and he looked at her with those dark, unhurried eyes. You want the story? I'm going to give it to you. Not the version you dig out of permits and shell companies and frightened sources who recant the moment they sober up. The real one. 30 days, exclusive access. You ask me anything and I'll answer it. On the record, the parts of it I choose to put on the record. No one alive has ever been given that. Senators have begged me for a phone call. The Bureau has spent 11 years and $40 million trying to get what I'm offering you for free. Nora's journalist's heart, traitor that it was, lurched in her chest. There's a condition, she said, because there was always a condition. There's a condition. His mouth curved. For 30 days, you live in my house. The water glass she had finally picked up stopped halfway to her lips. Absolutely not. It's not negotiable. I just survived an attempt on my life by someone with the access to know where I'd be and the skill to nearly finish the job. That tells me my house is no longer secure. Which means the city isn't. Which means you, the only witness, The woman now publicly tied to me the moment anyone reviews tonight's footage, are not safe in that sad little apartment in Henderson with the broken deadbolt you keep meaning to fix. He watched her flinch at Henderson, at broken deadbolt, at how much he knew. In my house, I can protect you, and the access is total. You'll have a wing, a car, anything you need. I have a daughter, Nora said. I have a 5-year-old. I'm not bringing my child into a— Bring her. The two words stopped her cold. Bring her, Vincent said again, and for the first time something in his voice was not the smooth, controlled instrument he wielded so carefully. Something underneath it, low and strange. The grounds are walled. There are men on every gate. There is no place in the state of Nevada, no police station, no church, no schoolhouse, safer for a child right now than behind my walls. You said it yourself. You don't get to decide who lives. Neither do I. But I can decide who I protect. And for 30 days, Miss Walsh, that's you. Both of you. She stared at him. Every instinct she had built over a decade of chasing men like him— run, lie, expose, never trust, the charm is the trap— screamed in unison. He was a killer. He was the killer. He funneled poison into the city's veins and laundered it through wedding chapels and dropped men who crossed him into the lake. She had 3 years of evidence proving it, sitting on his desk in a spiral notebook. And he was offering her the story of the century and a fortress for her child. And the only honest thing in the offer was that he had never once pretended to be good. Why? She said. The real why, not the debt. You could pay the debt by just letting me walk out the door and keeping your hands off me. So why the house? Why 30 days? Why me? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. The city hummed beyond the glass. Because in 19 years, he said finally, no one has ever knelt in my blood and ordered me to live. They kneel to beg. They kneel to swear loyalty. They kneel because they're afraid. He turned the amber glass slowly between his fingers, not drinking. You knelt because you decided I wasn't allowed to die in your hallway. And I have spent my entire life around people who want something from me, Miss Walsh, and I cannot for the life of me figure out what you want. And that is the most interesting thing that has happened to me in a decade. He set the glass down. 30 days, yes or no. And before you answer, understand that the smartest thing you could do is say no, take your notebook, and never come within a mile of me again. So I already know what you're going to say. You're a woman who knelt in a killer's blood. You were never going to walk away from the story. Nora Walsh looked at the Modigliani, at the safe behind it, at 3 years of work and the man it had been spent on, sitting across from her, bleeding and patient and utterly certain. Yes, she said. And Vincent Calabrese smiled the smile of a man who had just won a hand he'd dealt himself. The house was not a house. It was a statement, carved into the russet flank of the mountains west of the city, where the desert went theatrical and the light at dusk turned the rock the colour of dried blood. A long, low fortress of glass and limestone and steel, half buried in the hillside, as if it had grown there, with walls you didn't see until you were on top of them, and a gate that opened on a man's nod rather than a keypad, because keypads could be hacked, and men who loved Vincent Calabrese could not. Nora arrived with 2 suitcases, a car seat, a stuffed otter named Mr. Bubbles, and a 5-year-old who took one look at the place and said, with the flat profundity of the very young, "It's like a castle, but sad." Out of the mouths of babes, Nora muttered. They had a wing, an actual wing, 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, a bathroom with a tub Lily could have swum laps in, and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over a pool and the desert beyond it, rolling away gold and endless. A woman named Rosa, broad and warm and Sicilian to the marrow, had stocked the kitchenette with juice boxes and animal crackers and a brand of organic mac and cheese that Nora had mentioned exactly once to no one. That detail frightened her more than the men at the gate. She told herself she would not be charmed. She wrote it on the first page of a fresh notebook, the working notebook, the one she'd keep for the 30 days. He is performing. Everything here is staged. The mac and cheese is surveillance. Do not be charmed. She underlined "do not be charmed" twice. Lily was charmed within the hour. It happened at dinner, which Nora had assumed they'd take in the wing, alone, like prisoners. Instead, Rosa appeared and said, "Mr. Calabrese would like you to join him," and there had been no question in it. And so Nora put Lily in her least wrinkled dress and her own armour of black, and went down the long limestone hall to a dining room where a table that could have seated 20 held exactly 3 places. Vincent stood when they entered. His arm was in a discreet sling beneath his jacket, otherwise he showed nothing of the night before. He looked at Nora for a moment, that cataloguing look, the one that took inventory, and then he looked down at Lily, and Nora watched, helpless, as her daughter walked straight up to the most feared man in Nevada and announced, "You have a sad castle. Why is it sad?" The room went very still. Sal, by the door, looked as though he might have a stroke. Vincent crouched. It clearly cost his shoulder something to do it, and he did it anyway, lowering himself to Lily's eye level with a gravity Nora had not expected. "You know," he said, "I think it might be sad, because no one small has ever lived in it before. Houses get sad when there's no one small. Did you know that?" Lily considered this with enormous seriousness. "I'm small," she offered. "You are extremely small," Vincent agreed. "Possibly the smallest person I've ever met. I think you might fix it." Lily beamed, gap-toothed and instant and total, the way children give their hearts away to anyone who takes them seriously, and Nora felt something in her own chest clench like a fist, because this was the trap. This was the real one, not the mac and cheese, not the tub. This kindness aimed with sniper precision at the one undefended door in her whole life. And the worst part, the part that kept her awake that night staring at the desert moon, was that it had not looked like a performance. It had looked like a lonely man who had forgotten what small people were for. Dinner was osso buco, and a wine Nora allowed herself half a glass of, and questions she didn't ask, because the first day of 30 was not the day to start digging. They talked about nothing. Lily told a 15-minute story about Mr. Bubbles that had no discernible plot, and Vincent listened to all of it, asked 2 clarifying questions, and at the end said, "He sounds like a very loyal otter," which sent Lily into ecstasies. Later, when Rosa had taken Lily to draw a bath, Nora and Vincent were left at the long table with the candles guttering low. "You're good with her," Nora said. It was not a compliment. She made sure it wasn't a compliment. "Suspiciously good." "I had a sister," Vincent said. Past tense. Nora's reporter brain flagged it instantly. Had a sister. Gone. and her human heart, against orders, softened by a treacherous degree. What happened to her? He looked at the candle flame. For a moment the mask was not there at all, and what was underneath it was old and worn smooth like a stone in a river. Then the mask came back, and he stood, and the moment closed like a door. "That's not on the record," he said. "Good night, Miss Walsh. Your first interview is tomorrow at 10. Don't be late. And Nora—" He paused at the door, and her name in his mouth was a thing she felt in her spine. "The safe is behind the Modigliani, like your source told you. The combination is my sister's birthday. I tell you this so you understand. There's nothing in this house I'm hiding from you. The only things I hide are the things I'm protecting. There's a difference. You'll see it before the 30 days are out." And then he was gone, and Nora sat alone in the candlelight in the killer's house, and underlined "Do not be charmed" a third time, and did not believe her own pen. The interviews became a ritual, and rituals are dangerous because they make the strange familiar. Every morning at 10, in the salon with the stolen Modigliani, Nora sat across from Vincent Calabrese with a recorder running and a list of questions she'd refined the night before. And she tried to take apart an empire, one answer at a time. He was a magnificent subject. That was the problem. He was articulate, unhurried, and possessed of a memory so precise it was nearly inhuman. He could tell you the exact margin on a baccarat table in 2009, the name of the city councilman who'd zoned a parcel in his favour, and the name of the councilman's mistress. The structure of a holding company 3 shells deep. He answered everything she asked. He simply chose, with surgical care, which things he would let her ask, steering her again and again away from certain doors with a charm so smooth she sometimes didn't notice the wall until she'd already turned from it. "The senator," she said on the 4th day, "on the guest list at the Bellagio fundraiser, the one who swears he never came." "He came," Vincent said. "You'll confirm that on the record." "I'll confirm he came. I won't tell you what we discussed, and I'll deny ever having said the first part if you print it without the second, and your editor will spike it, because a half-quote from an anonymous source about a sitting senator is a libel suit, not a story." He smiled. "You know this. You're testing the boundaries. It's good practice. Try a harder door." She tried harder doors. Some of them opened, and what was behind them was worse than she'd imagined. The casual machinery of corruption, the way an entire city's apparatus could be quietly bought and folded into a man's pocket. He told her about it without shame and without pride, the way a civil engineer describes a bridge. This is how it's built. This is what holds it up. "Doesn't it bother you," she asked once, the recorder running, "what it costs people? The addiction your tables are designed to feed, the loan sharking, the—" "My tables are designed exactly the way the state of Nevada licenses them to be designed," Vincent said. "Every man who sits down at one knows the odds are against him. I don't lie to anyone, Miss Walsh. I run the most honest business in this dishonest city. The rules are printed on the felt." He leaned back. "You want to make me a monster. It's tidier that way. The story writes itself if I'm a monster. But I'm something worse than a monster, and I think you're starting to see it." "What's worse than a monster?" "A man who made rational choices," he said quietly, "in an irrational world, and who would make most of them again." It was, she wrote that night, the most chilling thing he'd said, and also the most honest, and she hated that those two things were not in conflict. But it wasn't the interviews that undid her. It was the spaces between them. It was finding him on the sixth evening, sitting on the floor of the great glass living room with Lily, the two of them building an impossible tower out of architectural foam blocks he had clearly had someone go out and buy because they were brand new and there was no other small person in this house. It was watching him take direction from a 5-year-old about structural integrity with total seriousness. It was Lily falling asleep against his uninjured arm halfway through the tower, and Vincent going perfectly still so as not to wake her, sitting there for 40 minutes with a dead arm and a sleeping child, and an expression on his face that Nora, watching from the doorway, had no category for. It was him noticing she was there, finally, meeting her eyes across the room over her daughter's sleeping head, and neither of them saying anything at all. It was the way he never once tried to touch her. That was the thing. She had braced for it, the inevitable pass, the leverage, the "you're living in my house and I hold all the cards." It never came. He was scrupulous to the point of obsession about it, kept a careful architectural distance, never let his hand brush hers passing a coffee cup, never stood too close. And somehow that restraint was louder than any pass could have been, because she could feel it being maintained, feel the deliberate effort of a man holding very still around something he wanted, and the knowledge of being wanted that carefully was its own slow heat. On the 9th night, she couldn't sleep. She went down to the kitchen for water and found him in the dark on the back terrace, a glass of the amber he never drank sitting full and ignored at his elbow, looking out at the desert and the cold spill of stars. "You don't sleep either," she said. "I haven't slept properly in 19 years. He didn't turn. "You learn to live in the parts of the night other people don't use." She should have gone back to bed. She got a second glass instead and sat down across from him, and for a long while neither of them spoke, and the desert breathed around them, vast and indifferent. "Your sister," Nora said finally, off the record, not for the story, just, "I want to know." Vincent was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Her name was Sophia," he said. "She was 19. She was the only good thing my father ever made, and she was going to be a doctor. And she died in a car that was meant for me." He turned the full glass a quarter turn on the stone. "That's when I became what I am, not before. People think I was born cold. I wasn't. I was made cold, on a Tuesday, in a hospital hallway, holding her hand while it stopped being warm." He looked at Nora then, and the stars were in his eyes, and the mask was nowhere to be found. "You asked why I let you bring your daughter," he said. "That's why. I know exactly what it costs to fail to protect the small ones. I won't fail again." Nora did not write it down. For the first time in her career, she heard a thing worth 1,000 words and did not write it down. And that, more than the mac and cheese, more than the tower of blocks, more than anything, was the moment she should have run. She didn't. Daniel Reyes called on the 11th day, and Nora made the mistake of answering. He had been her partner once, in the loosest sense, a fellow freelancer, sharper than he was talented, who had latched on to her Calabrese investigation 18 months ago with an enthusiasm she'd mistaken for friendship. He'd done legwork, he'd run down a source or two. She'd cut him in on a byline she didn't strictly owe him, because she was, her ex had also said, constitutionally unable to leave anyone behind. "Nora," His voice was too bright. It had always been too bright. Christ, I've been trying you for a week. Where the hell are you? Working, she said. She was in the wing, Lily napping in the next room, the desert blazing white beyond the glass. Heads down. You know how it is. I heard a thing. A pause calibrated. I heard you're inside. That you got to him. Calabrese. That you're... What? Living there? Nora's blood went cold. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? Nora, this is the story. This is the story. The one that makes careers, and you're sitting on it alone? Come on. We're partners. Send me what you've got. Let me help you build it out. Work the financials while you work the man. We split it down there's no we on this, Daniel. She kept her voice level. This is exclusive. It's mine. I'm sorry, I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the deal I made and I'm not breaking it. A silence on the line. And in the silence, she heard something she'd never let herself hear in 18 months. The absence of a friend and the presence of something else. A patience that wasn't patient. A waiting. Sure, Daniel said, easy again, too easy. Sure, I get it. Exclusive. Hey, how's Lily? She still got that otter? The mention of her daughter's name in his mouth raised every hair on Nora's body, and she could not have said why, only that some animal part of her, the part that had kept her alive in rooms with dangerous men for a decade, sat up and bared its teeth. She's fine, Nora said. I've got to go, Daniel. Yeah, course. Talk soon. She hung up and sat with the dead phone in her hand and her heart going too fast, and told herself she was being paranoid, that living in a fortress full of armed men was making her see ghosts, that Daniel was a hustler, but not a that. She almost talked herself out of it. Almost. She mentioned it to Vincent at the morning interview, off the record, almost as an afterthought. A colleague called, wanting in on the story, knows I'm here, which he shouldn't. It's nothing, he's just hungry. Vincent had been pouring coffee. He set the pot down with a care that was its own kind of alarm. What's his name? Daniel. Daniel Reyes. It's nothing, Vincent. He's a freelancer. He's not connected to anything. He just... How does he know you're here? Vincent's voice had changed. The smoothness had gone out of it, and what was underneath was flat and cold and very, very attentive. Think carefully. Who did you tell? No one. I told no one. I'm not an idiot. She stopped. The cold spread up her spine. He knew about Lily's otter. He asked about Mr. Bubbles by name. I don't think I ever told him she had an otter. Vincent was already moving. He crossed to the wall and pressed something, and Sal was in the doorway in seconds, and the two of them exchanged a few words in low, fast Italian that Nora caught only the edges of. The woman's colleague, Reyes, find everything, find it now. And then Vincent turned back to her, and his face had become the face from the legend, the cold hand, the man who never forgave, and she understood for the first time that she had only ever seen him at rest. It's probably nothing, she said. It came out small. It's probably nothing, Vincent agreed, and the gentleness in his voice was the worst thing she'd ever heard, because it was the gentleness of a man who already knew it was something. But we don't gamble with the small ones. Not in this house. Where is Lily right now? Napping in the wing. Sal will put a man on her door. Don't argue. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself, the old, careful distance reasserting itself even now. Listen to me. You did the right thing telling me. Whatever this is, you brought it into the light, and in the light, I can deal with it. The things that kill you are the things you don't say out loud. You understand? Yes, she whispered. Good. And then, because he was who he was, he added quietly, I told you there were things in this house I protect. I added 2 of them to the list 11 days ago. Go to your daughter, Nora. I'll handle Reyes. She went. She sat on the edge of Lily's bed and watched her child sleep with the otter clutched to her chest and the desert sun moving slow across the wall. And she told herself, over and over, that it was nothing. By nightfall, Vincent's people had pulled Daniel Reyes's phone records, his bank statements, his recent contacts. And in the cold ledger of those records was a number that called a number that called, 3 jumps removed, a soldier of the Bruno organisation. The same organisation whose gunman had put 2 bullets in Vincent Calabrese on the night this all began. Daniel Reyes wasn't hungry. Daniel Reyes was a door someone else had walked through. Vincent did not tell her. That was the thing she'd come back to, later, when she tried to map the exact geography of how she'd lost herself. That he had known, by that first night, what Daniel Reyes was, and he had not told her, because he had wanted one more day to be certain before he frightened her. And that single act of restraint, that one held breath, was somehow more intimate than anything he could have said. What he did instead was tighten the house around her like a fist. She noticed it, the way you notice weather changing, the new man at Lily's door, the way the gate stopped opening for anyone, the way Sal's eyes never seemed to leave her when she moved through the common rooms. She noticed Vincent was home more. He had a city to run, an empire of glass and felt and debt. And yet for 3 days running he was there, working from the salon, taking calls in low Italian, present in a way that should have felt like surveillance, and instead, traitor that her heart was, felt like being held. On the 13th night, she found him in the library. There was a library, of course there was, 2 floors of it, and most of the books had been read, she'd checked the spines. And he was standing at the window with a file in his hand, and when she came in, he closed it and set it down, and the closing of it told her everything. It's him, she said. Daniel. It's real. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, weighing. She could see him weighing. How much truth to give. All of it, she said. I'm not Lily, Vincent. Don't manage me. All of it. So he gave her all of it. The phone records, the chain of numbers ending at a Bruno soldier, the pattern of payments into Reyes's account, modest at first, then larger still, climbing in the weeks since she'd cut him into the byline. The picture it made was ugly and complete. He sold you, Vincent said, or he's selling you, your story, your 3 years of work, to the Brunos. They don't want you to publish it, Miss Walsh. They want to own it. A finished investigation into my organisation in the hands of a rival family is worth more than money. It's a map of every place I'm weak. It's a weapon they can hand to a federal prosecutor anonymously and let the law do the wet work for them, clean hands all around. And when I'm in a cell, they take my city without firing a shot. He set the file down. Your colleague found a buyer for something that wasn't his to sell. The only thing he doesn't have is the story itself, which means he needs me, Nora said slowly. Or he needs... She stopped. The blood drained out of her face so fast she swayed, and Vincent was across the room in an instant, hand hovering at her elbow, not quite touching, the discipline holding even now. He needs leverage, she said, to make me hand it over. He needs— Lily is asleep, Vincent said, fast and firm, behind a locked door, with a man outside it, inside a walled compound with armed men on every gate. She is the single most protected child in this state. Look at me. Look at me. I will not let anything happen to her. Do you believe me? And the terrible thing, the thing she would think about for the rest of her life, was that she did. She looked into the dark, coffee eyes of the most dangerous man she had ever known, the man whose empire her own work could shatter, and she believed him completely and without reservation. And the believing was a kind of falling, and she felt herself fall. "I believe you," she said. Something broke loose in his face. He was so close. The careful architecture of distance he had maintained for 13 days wavered, and for one suspended heartbeat she thought he would close it, thought she wanted him to close it, her own breath gone shallow, and the air between them so charged it hummed. He stepped back. He physically stepped back, putting the distance there himself, and the effort it cost him was written in the tendons standing out along his jaw. "Not like this," he said, low and rough, "not when you're frightened, not when you might mistake gratitude for something else, and not when I might let you, because God knows I want to." He turned away to the window, both hands braced on the sill, head bowed. "Go to bed, Nora. Lock your door, not because you're in danger inside this house, but because I am exactly as dangerous to you as the legends say, in a different way than they mean, and I am 13 days from doing something we'll both have to live with." She stood in the doorway of the library and looked at the long line of his back, the bowed head, the white knuckles on the sill, and she understood that she was watching a man hold a door shut against himself, and that he was doing it for her, and that no one in her entire adult life had ever once wanted her badly enough to refuse himself in order to protect her from the wanting. "Vincent," she said, "go to bed, Nora." She went. She did not lock the door. She lay awake in the desert dark and listened to her daughter breathe in the next room, and felt the whole careful edifice of "Do Not Be Charmed" come down around her like a building in a slow-motion film, silent, total, complete. In the morning, everything was normal again. The interview at 10, the coffee he poured, the distance restored, immaculate. But it was too late, and they both knew it, and the knowing sat in the room with them like a third person, patient as the desert, waiting for its moment. It came 2 days later, and it came wearing the face of her own betrayal, and it took the only thing in the world she could not survive losing. It happened in the 4 minutes Nora was in the shower. She would reconstruct it 1,000 times. Rosa had taken Lily out to the walled garden, a daily thing, the two of them, Rosa teaching her the Italian words for flowers, fiore, rosa, girasole. And the garden was inside the walls, inside the men, inside every layer of protection Vincent had built, and it should have been the safest 4 minutes of the day. But Daniel Reyes had spent 18 months learning Nora Walsh's life, and a man who knows your life knows your weaknesses, and he had not come over the wall, he had come through it. A delivery van, a landscaping contract that had been clean for 2 years until someone bought the one driver who could be bought. A side gate that opened for 90 seconds for a man Rosa had seen a dozen times. Nora came out of the shower to the sound of Rosa screaming. She would never forget the sound. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a woman who had failed at the one thing she'd been trusted with, and it came from the garden. And Nora was running before she'd finished pulling her shirt over her head, running down the long limestone hall with her hair dripping and her heart already knowing, already before she reached the doors. The garden gate stood open. Rosa was on her knees in the gravel, her hands pressed to her mouth, and Mr. Bubbles, the otter, the stupid, beloved otter, lay in the dirt by the open gate where a small hand had dropped it. Lily was gone. The next hour did not happen to Nora so much as it happened around her, a hurricane she stood frozen at the eye of. She remembered fragments. Her own voice screaming her daughter's name into the empty garden as though Lily might simply be hiding. Sal's face, grey, the face of a man whose entire life was built on a single promise. No one gets through. Discovering that someone had. The men flooding the grounds, the van found abandoned 4 miles down the canyon road, empty. And Vincent. Vincent had been in the city. He came through the front doors 20 minutes later, moving faster than she'd ever seen him move, and he took one look at her, soaked, shaking, holding the otter against her chest like it was the child itself. And something happened to his face that she had no name for, because it was not the cold hand, and it was not the gentle man who built block towers. It was something older and more terrible than either. It was the face, she understood much later, of a man standing again in a hospital hallway, holding a hand going cold. Except this time, he had arrived in time. This time, there was still something to be done, and he would do it, or he would burn the world down trying. "My phone," he said, to no one and everyone. "Get me my phone, get me Marco, get me every man we have and every man we don't. Get me the favour I'm owed by the Salernos, and the one the Vietnamese owe me on Spring Mountain, and the one the cops owe me from the thing in 19. Get me everyone." And then he crossed to Nora and did the thing he had not done in 15 days. He took her face in both his hands. "Nora." His thumbs against her cheekbones, his eyes locked on hers, fierce and absolutely certain. "Look at me. Listen to me. I am going to find her, do you hear me? Not the police. They're slower than I am, and half of them are mine anyway. Me. I own this city. There is not a road she can be driven down, not a door she can be carried through, not a hole deep enough in the whole goddamn desert that I don't have eyes on. I will find your daughter, and I will put her back in your arms before this day is over. I have never broken a promise in my life. I'm not starting with this one." "It's Daniel," Nora said. Her voice was a wreck. "It's him. He wants the story. He'll trade her for the story. I'll give it to him. I'll give him everything. I don't care about the—" "You won't give him anything," Vincent said, "because by the time he asks, I'll already have her. Trust me. Trust me." His thumb moved once across her cheek, brushing away water or tears, she couldn't tell which. "You knelt in my blood and ordered me to live. Now it's my turn. Sit down, drink water, and let me show you what I am for." He turned, and the house turned with him. What followed, Nora witnessed but could not have built. A machine she'd spent 3 years documenting from the outside, now running at full and terrible capacity in front of her, for her. Phones lit up across the city. A man at the airport, a man at every casino floor reviewing footage. The toll cameras, somehow, impossibly, pulled within the hour. A whisper network of valets and dealers and dishwashers and beat cops, every one of them owing the cold hand something, every debt called in at once, the whole vast, invisible ledger of a city's corruption turned in a single afternoon toward the singular project of finding one gap-toothed 5-year-old. Nora sat in the salon, under the Modigliani with the otter in her lap, and watched the empire she had come to destroy mobilize to save her child. And she did not know any more which side of anything she was on. Vincent had said 6 hours. He had lied. It took him 5. The phone rang at the 3rd hour. Nora knew it would be Daniel before Vincent answered, knew it the way you know a storm is coming by the pressure in your skull. Vincent set the phone in the centre of the long table and pressed a button, and Daniel Reyes's voice filled the salon. Too bright, always too bright. But underneath the brightness now, there was a tremor that told her he had finally understood what he'd put his hand into. Nora, listen to me. She's fine. She's totally fine. Nobody's going to hurt her. This is just business. Daniel. Nora's voice came out flat and dead, and very, very calm. A calm that frightened her more than screaming would have. Where is my daughter? Somewhere safe. Somewhere. Look. You give me the story, the whole thing, every file, every photo, the notebook, all of it, and in 1 hour she's home and we forget this ever. Nora, are you there? You give me the report and... Vincent leaned toward the phone. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Daniel, he said, do you know who this is? A silence. A long, swallowing silence, and then, smaller. Calabrese. You took a child out of my house, Vincent said, and the gentleness in his voice was the gentleness of a man describing how he would peel an orange. From inside my walls. You used a girl's stuffed animal and a side gate and a driver I will be having a very long conversation with. I want you to understand something, Daniel, while you still have the capacity to understand things. I have, in the last 3 hours, made approximately 400 phone calls. I know the van. I know it was abandoned at the mouth of the canyon. I know you switched to a grey sedan with a dealer plate, and I know that plate. And I know that you do not, in fact, have anywhere safe to take her. Because there is nowhere in this city that is not, in some final accounting, mine. A pause. You have made one mistake your friend the Brunos did not warn you about. You thought you were stealing a story. You were stealing the one thing on this earth I will tear the world apart to return. Hang up the phone, Daniel. Run. It won't matter, but run. The line went dead. Vincent looked at the phone for a moment. Then he looked at Marco. The dealer plate. He just confirmed it's still on the car. He's panicking, which means he's moving, which means he's findable. Go. The 4th hour was the longest hour of Nora Walsh's life. She did not move from the chair beneath the Modigliani. She held the otter. Vincent did not leave her side. He ran the entire operation from the chair across the table, phone to his ear, voice low and ceaseless and absolutely controlled. And every few minutes between calls, he would look at her and say one true thing. We have the car on a camera at Charleston and Rancho. We're narrowing it. She's alive, Nora. A dead child is no leverage, and Daniel knows it. She's alive, and she's scared, and we're coming. He did not lie to comfort her. He told her only what was true, and the truth, in his mouth, was the only thing holding her together. Why, she said, at one point, into the silence between his calls, Why are you doing this? The story could still bury you. Get her back, I publish, you go to prison forever. You know that. So why? Vincent lowered the phone. He looked at her across the table, across 15 days, across the whole impossible distance between what they were supposed to be to each other. Because there's a hallway I've been standing in for 19 years, he said quietly, holding a hand that won't get warm again. And today, for the first time, I get to walk out of it with the right answer, with a warm hand. His jaw tightened. I don't care about the story, Nora. I have never, for 1 second since you knelt in my blood, cared about the story. Publish it. Bury me. But I am going to put your daughter back in your arms first, because that's the only thing in my entire life I've ever wanted to do that I'm not ashamed of. She had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. The call came at the 5th hour. Marco's voice, taut through the phone, Vincent had not let leave his hand. We have him. Sunset and Eastern, a motel, the sedan's in the lot. He's inside, room 12. He's alone with her. He's got a gun, Vincent, but he doesn't know how to use it. He's a writer. I'm coming, Vincent said, and he was already standing. No, said Marco. Boss, you don't go into rooms anymore. That's not what you do. Let the men. I'm coming, Vincent said again, and there was no arguing with it. And Nora was on her feet, and she said, I'm coming too, and Vincent looked at her, and for 1 second she thought he would forbid it, and then he saw her face, the face of a mother, and he gave a single short nod, because he, of all men on earth, understood that some things you do not ask a parent to wait through. The drive was 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. Vincent sat beside her in the back of the car, with a gun she hadn't known he carried resting flat on his knee, and he was utterly still, and he said only one thing the entire way, looking straight ahead into the desert dark. When we get there, you stay behind me. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, you stay behind me until I tell you it's clear, and then you go to your daughter, and you don't look back, and you let me handle the rest. He turned his head. Can you do that? Yes, Nora whispered. Good. He looked back at the road. The motel sign rose ahead of them, pink and dying neon against the black mountains. Then let's go bring her home. The motel was the kind of place where the desert came to die. A horseshoe of doors the colour of old teeth, a dry pool full of tumbleweed, a vacancy sign that had given up. Vincent's men were already there, 3 cars arranged with a casual menace across the lot, blocking every exit, and they moved aside for him the way water moves aside for the prow of a ship. He went to the door of room 12, and he did not kick it in. That surprised her. He stood beside it, out of the line of any shot through the cheap wood, and he knocked, twice, almost gentle. Daniel, he said through the door, conversational, intimate. It's over. The lot is full of my people. There's no car you can reach, no road you can take, no call you can make that I haven't already made first. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to open this door, and you're going to walk out with your hands where I can see them, and you're going to live. Or you're going to make me come in, and you won't. It's the simplest math you'll ever do. I'd do it quickly. Silence from inside. Then a child's voice, Lily's voice, thin and frightened and unmistakable. Mummy? Nora made a sound she'd never made before, and lunged for the door, and Vincent's arm came across her like a steel bar, holding her back, holding her behind him, his eyes never leaving the door. Wait, he breathed. Wait. Mummy's here, baby, Nora called, and her voice cracked down the middle. Mummy's right here. I'm right here. You be brave for 30 more seconds, okay? 30 seconds. Inside, a man's voice, ragged. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't. They said it'd be clean. They said you'd just give it to me. They lied to you, Vincent said through the door, almost kind. They use people like you, and they discard them, Daniel. It's what they do. It's what they were always going to do to you the second you handed over the story. You were never going to get paid. You were going to get buried, a loose end, the man who could connect them to a kidnapping. The only person in this entire city offering you a way to live tonight is me. Open the door. A long, shaking silence. The chain rattled, the door opened, and Daniel Reyes stood there in the dim light of room 12, grey-faced, a gun hanging useless from one hand, and behind him, on a sagging bed beneath a painting of a desert that looked nothing like the real one, sat Lily. Small, so small, her cheeks streaked, Mr. Bubbles nowhere, because Mr. Bubbles was back at the house in her mother's chair, and she saw Nora, and her whole face came apart. "Mummy!" It happened fast then. Vincent moved into the room and took the gun out of Daniel's hand the way you take a toy from a tired child. No violence in it at all. Just a quiet and total authority. And he passed the weapon back to Sal without looking, and he said, "Nora, go." And Nora went. She crossed the room and gathered her daughter up off that filthy bed, and held her so hard that Lily squeaked, and she pressed her face into her child's hair and breathed in the smell of her. Sweat and tears and shampoo and Lily, alive, whole, here. And the sound that came out of Nora then was not a word, was not anything, was just the rawest noise a human body can make when the thing it could not survive losing is handed back to it. Behind her, low and even, she heard Vincent. "Take him, not the lake. I want him alive, and I want him talking. The Brunos handed me a thread, and I'm going to pull it until something unravels. But Daniel," she heard the man whimper, "you will never see this city again. You will never see her again. You took a child. There's no ledger deep enough to forgive that. Get him out of my sight." They took him. The room emptied, and then it was just the three of them in the buzzing, fluorescent quiet, the mother, the child, and the man who had moved heaven and the entire criminal underworld of Las Vegas to put them back together. Lily lifted her head from Nora's shoulder. She looked at Vincent with her tear-swollen eyes, and in the unbreakable logic of a 5-year-old who had decided 2 weeks ago that this sad castle man was safe, she reached out one small hand toward him. "You came," she said, as though she'd never doubted it. "You found me." Vincent Calabrese, the cold hand, who had not forgiven a soul in 19 years, who ran a city on the principle that mercy was a weakness other men could not afford, stood in a dying motel room and looked at the small hand reaching for him, and something in his face that had been frozen since a hospital hallway broke, finally, all the way, and Nora watched it break. He took the small hand. He didn't say anything. He couldn't, she thought. There were no words built for the size of what was happening in him. He just held Lily's hand for a moment, his throat working, and then he stepped back and squared his shoulders and became, for their sake, steady again. "Let's go home," he said. Home. He said it without thinking, and none of them corrected it. They drove back through the desert dark, with Lily asleep across both their laps before they'd cleared the canyon, her head on her mother's thigh, her feet against Vincent's leg. And over the top of her sleeping child, Nora Walsh looked at Vincent Calabrese, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said a single word. She didn't need to. He'd been right 15 days ago in the salon. She knew now which side she was on, and she was lost. Lily slept for 14 hours. Nora did not sleep at all. She lay in the dark of the wing with her daughter's hand fisted in her shirt. Lily had refused, wordlessly and absolutely, to sleep alone, and Nora would have died before making her. And she watched the desert dawn come up grey and then gold over the mountains. And she felt the shape of her own life rearrange itself around the events of a single day, like sand resettling after an earthquake. She had thought she understood what she was doing here. She had thought she was a journalist embedded in a story, a professional maintaining a professional distance, a woman keeping a ledger of a dangerous man's sins. She had written, "Do not be charmed," on the first page of her notebook and underlined it 3 times. She understood now that the notebook had been a lie from the first interview. You could not be charmed by a man and call it journalism. But you also could not watch a man turn an entire criminal empire toward the rescue of your child, could not watch him take a small, frightened hand in a motel room and break apart, and go on pretending the only thing between you was a recorder and a list of questions. When Lily finally woke, ravenous and clingy and asking for pancakes, Rosa appeared at the door of the wing with red-rimmed eyes and a face full of such guilt and grief that Nora's anger, and there had been anger, a mother's blind animal anger at the woman who'd let her daughter be taken, dissolved into something gentler. Rosa had not betrayed them. Rosa had been used, the same as everyone, by a man who studied lives and exploited the love in them. Lily ran to her, in fact, the moment she saw her, and Rosa made a sound and scooped her up and held her and said, "Fiore, fiore, mia piccola fiore," into her hair. And Nora stood in the doorway and let 2 people who loved her daughter hold each other. Vincent was not at breakfast. She found him finally in the salon, and he was not himself. Or rather, he was a different self, one she hadn't seen, stripped down. He stood at the window in shirt sleeves, with the morning light hard on him, and he looked like a man who had also not slept, and when he heard her come in, he didn't turn. "She's eating pancakes," Nora said. "She's asking when she can build another tower with you." A long silence. His shoulders, when he finally spoke, were very still. "You should leave," Vincent said. It landed like a slap. "What?" "Today. This morning. I'll have a house arranged, somewhere safe, somewhere clean, no connection to me, new names if you want them, money, whatever you need for as long as you need it. The Reyes thread is being pulled, and the Brunos are going to feel it, and when a family like that gets hurt, they reach for whatever's nearest, and the nearest thing—" He turned, finally, and his face was carved out of exhaustion and something worse. "The nearest thing is you. And her. I will not have it. I brought you into this house to protect you, and instead I nearly got your daughter killed. The math is simple. The safest thing in the world for the 2 of you is to be as far from Vincent Calabrese as the earth allows. So go. Take the story. Publish it, don't publish it, I don't care. Just go, before this place costs you the only thing you can't afford to lose." Nora looked at him. Standing there in the merciless morning light, this man who never begged, never bent, never gave an inch to anyone, sending away the only thing he'd wanted in a decade, for her sake, because he had decided her safety was worth more than his own wanting. And she understood that this was the most dangerous moment of all the dangerous days. Because a man trying to keep you was a thing she'd been trained to resist. A man trying to lose you, for love, was a thing she had no defence against whatsoever. "No," she said. Vincent closed his eyes. "Nora, you said you'd give me 30 days. It's day 16. She crossed the room toward him, and for once she was the one closing the distance, and she watched him go rigid as she came. "I have a deal, and I don't break deals either." "You're not the only one with a ledger." She stopped in front of him, closer than she had ever let herself stand. "And the story isn't finished. There's something in it I don't understand yet. A whole set of transactions I can't make sense of. 12 of them. Money going out, not coming in. Every month, like clockwork. To 12 entities I can't identify. And you wouldn't talk about them in any interview. You steered me away from them every single time. And I want to know what they are before I leave this house. So no, I'm not going. Not until you tell me what you're hiding." Vincent looked down at her. So close she could see the exhaustion in him, the unshaved jaw, the dark eyes that had not, even now, even once, asked her for anything. "You don't want to know," he said softly. "Knowing it will make this harder, for both of us. Tell me anyway." "Why?" "Because," Nora said, and her voice broke a little, and she let it. "I am about to make the biggest decision of my entire life, and I will not make it on incomplete information. I'm a reporter, Vincent. Give me the last piece. Then I'll decide what kind of woman I'm going to be." He looked at her for a very long time, and then he made a decision of his own. She watched him make it, watched something in him surrender, and he said, "All right. Not here. Get your coat. There's somewhere I need to take you." They drove north, out of the city, into the part of the valley the tourists never saw. The real Las Vegas, the one made of strip malls and check-cashing storefronts and stucco apartments baking in the sun. The city that served the city. Vincent drove himself. No Sal, no Marco, no second car. Just the two of them, and the desert, and a silence that had stopped being uncomfortable somewhere around day 10. He stopped in front of a building Nora wouldn't have looked at twice. Low, clean, recently painted a hopeful yellow. A small fenced yard out front full of second-hand playground equipment that had been lovingly repaired. A hand-painted sign over the door. Casa di Sofia, a home for children. Sophia, his sister's name. "There are 12, Vincent said. He hadn't turned off the engine. His hands stayed on the wheel, his eyes straight ahead. 12 homes. This was the first. I opened it 11 years ago, 2 years after she died. Sophia wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to spend her life on the children nobody else wanted, the ones who fall through. She never got to. So. He stopped. His jaw worked. So I do it for her. 12 homes across the state. Almost 400 children right now, this morning, eating breakfast in houses I pay for, going to schools I pay for, seeing doctors I pay for. Every one of them an orphan or close enough. kids the system gave up on, kids of men who worked for me and died, kids of women my business ruined. I take the ones nobody else will take. Nora could not speak. That's where the 12 transactions go, he said, every month, the money that goes out. You couldn't identify the entities because I built them to be unidentifiable. 11 layers of shell between the casino floor and the cereal in those kitchens. Because if it ever got out that the cold hand had a soft place, every enemy I have would know exactly where to put the knife. A man in my position cannot afford to be known to love anything. It's the first rule. The thing you love is the thing they take. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it. I learned that lesson in a hospital hallway, and I learned it again 16 days later in a motel room, watching a man use your daughter against you. The things you love are the things they take. So I hide them. I have spent 11 years hiding the only good thing I do behind 11 layers of crime so that no one could ever use it against me. Vincent, you wanted the last piece. His voice was rough. There it is. The man you came to bury launders dirty money. That's true. Printed. It's true. But the dirty money doesn't go into a yacht or a Swiss account. It goes into that building and 11 more like it, and it buys 400 children the childhood my sister wanted to give the world and never got to. You can fit that in your story, or you can leave it out. But you asked me what I was hiding, and the answer is, I'm hiding the fact that the worst man in Las Vegas is also, in the one ledger that matters to me, trying very hard to balance an account that can never be balanced. Because Sophia is still dead, and no number of warm hands ever makes the cold one warm again. The desert sun hammered down on the hopeful yellow building. Inside, faintly, Nora could hear children. The high, chaotic music of a lot of kids in one place, laughing, shrieking, alive. "Can I go in?" she whispered. He hadn't expected that. "What?" "I want to see it. Not for the story, I just—" Her voice gave out. "I want to see it." So they went in, and a woman with kind eyes and an Italian accent thicker than Rosa's greeted Vincent, not as a Mafia boss, but as something else entirely. Mr. C, the children called him, swarming him the moment he came through the door, and he crouched down among them with his bad shoulder and let them climb on him, and he knew their names, all of their names, the 7-year-old with the gap teeth, and the shy one who hid behind the others, and the loud one who showed him a drawing of a dinosaur with 11 legs. And Vincent looked at the 11-legged dinosaur with exactly the same grave seriousness he'd given Lily's foam tower, and he said, "That is structurally a very strong dinosaur." And the child glowed. Nora stood in the doorway of the home he'd named for his dead sister, and she watched the most dangerous man in Nevada, beloved by children who didn't know what he was. And she understood with total and devastating clarity that her 3 years of work, her notebook, her career-making, empire-ending story was sitting on a fault line, and that the fault line was her own heart, and that it had already started to give. In the car afterward, neither of them spoke for a long time. "You shouldn't have shown me that," Nora said finally. "You just made it impossible for me to write the truth." "I showed you the truth," Vincent said, "the whole truth. What you do with it. He pulled the car back onto the road toward the mountains and the fortress and the rest of their 30 days, is the difference between a journalist and a propagandist.
You came here to write that I'm a monster. I'm not asking you to write that I'm a saint. I'm asking you to write that I'm a man. That's all. That's the only thing I've ever wanted from anyone, and you're the first person in 19 years I've trusted to do it. She looked out at the desert and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't have been a confession. That night, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. Lily slept, alone, in her own bed at last, having declared, with the resilience that only children possess, that she was done being scared, and Mr. Bubbles would protect her. Rosa slept. The men changed shifts at the gates with their quiet murmurs, and Nora Walsh could not stay in her room. She found him, of course, on the terrace. He always ended his nights on the terrace, with the glass of amber he never drank, looking out at the desert and the stars, and whatever ghosts kept him company. She had learned his geography. That was the thing about 16 days. You learned a person's geography whether you meant to or not. She came and stood beside him at the rail, close, closer than the careful distance he'd kept for 16 days. He went still. She'd learned to read that too, the particular stillness of a man holding himself in check. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." "I don't sleep. I know." She looked at his profile against the stars, the broken and reset jaw, the dark eyes. "I figured out why, I think. You stay up to keep watch. You've been keeping watch over something your whole life." "Sophia, the kids, now," she stopped. "Now," he agreed, very quietly, and didn't finish it either. The desert wind moved between them, warm and dry. "You said you wouldn't," Nora said. "That first week. In the library, you stepped back. You said, 'Not when you're frightened. Not when you might mistake gratitude for something else.'" "I remember. I'm not frightened anymore. Lily's safe. The thing that scared me is over." She turned to face him fully, and her heart was going so hard she was sure he could hear it. "And it was never gratitude, Vincent. I want you to know that. I've been telling myself it was gratitude for 16 days, because gratitude is safe. Gratitude is something I can write in a notebook and underline and pretend explains everything. But it was never gratitude. It was the block tower. It was the way you listened to her otter story for 15 minutes. It was you stepping back in that library when stepping forward would have been so easy, and you wanted to so badly I could feel it. It was a yellow building, full of children you hide behind 11 layers of crime so no one can use them against you. Her voice broke. "It was never gratitude. So you don't get to use that excuse anymore. That door is closed." Vincent turned. He looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she watched the cold hand lose a hand he'd been holding close for 19 years. "You understand what I am," he said, and it was almost a plea. "You, of all people. You have 3 years of it in a notebook. I've done things, Nora. Things that can't be undone. Things the orphanages don't balance, no matter how many children I know what you are. I'm not a good man." "I didn't ask for a good man," Nora said. "I had a good man once. He left when the work got hard, and he sends Lily a card on her birthday if he remembers. I don't want a good man. I want a true one. And you have been with me from the first minute. You've never once pretended to be anything you're not. You told me the safe combination on the first night. You told me to leave for my own good this morning when keeping me would have been so easy. You are the most honest, dishonest man I have ever met in my life, and I am done. I'm done resisting it. I'm done writing "Do not be charmed" in a notebook like a child writing lines. Nora. Her name in his mouth, ragged now, the control finally cracking. "Close the distance, Vincent," she whispered. "You've been holding it open for 16 days. I'm telling you, you can close it. Close it." And the cold hand reached out with the hand he'd kept cold for 19 years, and he cupped her face the way he had in the motel parking lot, except this time there was no child to save, no city to mobilize, nothing in the entire universe but the two of them, and the desert, and the patient indifferent stars, and he closed the distance. The kiss was not what she expected. She had expected the legend, something dark and hard and consuming, a man who took. Instead it was unbearably gentle, and it shook. He shook, this enormous, controlled man, trembling against her, like the kiss cost him more than the bullets had, like he was handing her something he'd spent his whole life refusing to hand anyone, and Nora understood that she was not being taken at all. She was being trusted, which was, for a man like Vincent Calabrese, a far more dangerous and naked thing. When they broke apart, his forehead came down against hers, and they stood like that, breathing the same air, his hands still framing her face like she was something that might break or vanish. "This is a catastrophe," he murmured. "You know that. For both of us. You're a journalist with enough on me to—" "I know. And I'm a man whose enemies will use you the second they know you matter to me." "I know that too. And it's day 16 of 30, and I have no idea what happens on day 31. "Neither do I," Nora said, and she found, to her own astonishment, that she was smiling, that for the first time in years she was looking straight into an uncertain future and not flinching. "I have no idea, Vincent, and I don't want to figure it out tonight. Tonight, I just want to be a woman on a terrace with a man she's stopped lying to herself about. Just tonight. We can be catastrophes in the morning." And Vincent Calabrese, who never gambled on anything he couldn't control, looked at the woman who had knelt in his blood and ordered him to live, and took the worst bet of his life. He kissed her again. The last 2 weeks were the happiest of Nora's life, and she knew it even as she lived them, which is a rare and terrible kind of happiness, the kind you can feel ending under your fingers even as you hold it. The interviews continued, but they changed. The recorder still ran at 10, and Vincent still answered her questions, but now between the questions there were silences full of things, and sometimes she'd look up from her notes and find him watching her, and the look on his face would scatter every question she'd prepared. Marco noticed. Marco noticed everything, and Marco's face, when he looked at the two of them, was the face of a man watching someone he loved walk out onto thin ice. "He's not himself," Marco told her once, having intercepted her in the hall with the particular gravity of a man who has decided to risk a conversation he shouldn't. "You should know that. In 19 years I have never seen him soft. It's beautiful, and it's going to get him killed. A man in his position cannot afford what you're doing to him. The minute the families smell it, the minute they understand that the cold hand has a warm place, they will aim everything they have at exactly that spot, at you, at your little girl. You understand?" Loving you is the most dangerous thing he has ever done, more dangerous than any war."
"I didn't ask him to," Nora said quietly.
"No," Marco agreed. "That's why he can't stop." She thought about that for a long time. But there were also the good days, the borrowed ones. There was the afternoon Vincent taught Lily to swim in the long blue pool, the two of them in the water for hours, his patience inexhaustible, his big, careful hands holding her small body level while she kicked and shrieked and finally, swam 3 strokes on her own and came up, gasping and triumphant. And Vincent's laugh, his real laugh, the one Nora had only heard bleeding on a marble floor, rang out across the desert. There was the night they ate dinner, all of them, even Rosa, even Sal, who unbent enough to let Lily put a paper crown on his enormous bald head. And it felt, for the length of one meal, like a family. Nora watched it, and her reporter's brain whispered, "This is a crime family. These are killers. This is a man whose business destroys lives." And her heart whispered back, "And yet," and the two of them had stopped arguing, had reached a kind of exhausted truce. Because the truth, the real truth, the one Vincent had begged her to write, was that both whispers were correct at once, and that a human being could be both things, all things, in the same skin, and that she had spent a decade writing villains and had never once understood that, until now. There was the night he told her the rest of it, not on the record. The things the orphanages didn't balance. A man, years ago, who'd informed, and what had been done to him. A war, and the bodies it had cost. He told her in the dark, in a low, flat voice, not asking for forgiveness, not flinching from it, laying his sins out one by one, like a man emptying his pockets before sleep. "I'm telling you," he said, "because if you're going to stay, if there's any world where you stay, you have to know all of it. Not the version that fits in a story, all of it. The man who funds 12 orphanages is the same man who did these things. I won't let you love half of me. It's all of it, or none." She lay in the dark beside him and listened to the worst of him, and she did not run. And in the morning she was still there, and that, more than the kiss, more than anything, was the moment Vincent Calabrese stopped, somewhere deep in the frozen architecture of himself, believing he was alone. But the days ran out. They always do. Day 30 arrived the way the last day of anything arrives, too fast and ordinary, the desert sun coming up exactly as it had on the other 29. And with day 30 came the thing they'd both been not talking about, the thing that had sat in the corner of every kiss and every silence. The story was finished. It was finished. She'd known it for days. She had 3 years of evidence and 30 days of exclusive access and a complete, airtight, devastating account of the criminal empire of Vincent Calabrese. Enough, more than enough, to hand a federal prosecutor the case of a generation. Enough to put him in a cell until he died. Enough to make Nora Walsh the most important investigative journalist in the country. It sat on her laptop in a single document, 41,000 words, the best work she had ever done. And on day 30, while Lily napped and Vincent was in the city closing the res matter once and for all, Nora Walsh sat down in the wing of the fortress on Red Rock, opened the document, scrolled to the top, and looked at the small blue button at the corner of her publishing platform, the one that would send it, in a single click, to her editor, to the wire, to the world. Publish. Her hand found the trackpad, her finger found the button, and there she stopped, frozen, the cursor hovering, the whole of her future and his hanging on the next quarter-inch of motion. She had a decision to make, the biggest of her life. And that was when her phone rang. It was Vincent. Of course, it was Vincent. She looked at his name on the screen. She'd put it in her phone as just V, a small cowardice, a small protection. And the phone buzzed in her hand while the cursor hovered over the blue button. And she understood, in the way you understand things in the marrow before the mind catches up, that he knew. That he had always known this moment was coming, that somewhere in his vast machine of informants and instincts, the cold hand had felt the exact moment his fate came to rest under a journalist's fingertip, and he had called. She answered. She didn't say hello. "It's day 30, she said instead. "It's day 30, Vincent agreed. His voice was very calm, the calmest she'd ever heard it, and she'd heard it bleeding. "And you're sitting in front of the story?" It wasn't a question. She didn't insult him by pretending. "Yes." "It's finished?" "Yes." "And it's good?" A pause. "It would end me." "It would put you in prison for the rest of your life," Nora said. Her voice was shaking. The cursor was shaking. "Vincent, I have everything. The wires, the chapels, the senator, I have everything. I could click one button and you'd be gone. The empire would be gone, all of it, and I would be the journalist who finally got the cold hand, and I—" Her throat closed. "I know," he said gently. "I've always known what you have. I gave most of it to you, myself." "Why?" It came out as a sob. "Why would you do that? Why would you hand me the gun?" "Because." A long breath on the line. The sound of him far away in the city, choosing his words with the care of a man who has decided to tell the truth one final time. "Because I'm tired, Nora. I've carried this for 19 years, and I'm tired, and for 30 days you made me forget how tired I was. And because I would rather you have the gun than anyone else on earth. If it ends, I want it to end in your hands. There's a kind of mercy in that, the only kind I'd accept." She was crying now, openly, the desert blurring beyond the glass. "Tell me not to. Vincent, tell me not to do it. Beg me. Please, just this once. Beg me." "No." The single word, soft and absolute. "I never beg," Vincent said. "You know that. It's the one thing I've never done, the one line I've never crossed. Not for my own life, not when I was bleeding on the floor and you were the only thing between me and the dark. I didn't beg you then, and I won't beg you now." "So I'm not going to tell you not to do it, Nora. I'm going to tell you the opposite." A breath. "Do it." "What?" "Do it. Click the button. Publish the story." His voice did not waver, but underneath it, far underneath, she heard something she had never once heard in him, not in 30 days, not in any of it. She heard fear, raw and naked and human. "You're a journalist, the best one I've ever met. You spent 3 years digging out the truth, and I will not be the thing that makes you bury it. If you bury this story for me, then in some way I've made you smaller. And I've spent 30 days falling in love with you exactly the size you are. So do it. Publish. Be who you are. Vincent, but I want you to know something first.
And here his voice finally broke, just slightly, just enough, a single hairline crack in a wall 19 years thick. I have been afraid of exactly one thing in my entire adult life, and that's losing my power. Because power was the only thing standing between the people I love and the people who want to hurt them. That's the only fear I've ever allowed myself, until now. A long, shaking silence on the line. This is the first time, Nora, the first time in 19 years that I've been afraid of losing something that isn't power. And I needed you to know that before you decide. Not so you'll change your mind. I told you, I'm not begging. I just... His voice dropped to almost nothing. I needed one person on this earth to know that the cold hand was capable of being afraid of losing someone. And I wanted that person to be you. Now, do it. I'm hanging up. I won't make you do it with me on the line. Goodbye, Nora. Vincent, don't. I love you, Vincent Calabrese said, simply, the way he said all his truest things, with no decoration and no defence. However this ends, I love you. Goodbye. The line went dead. Nora Walsh sat alone in the desert light with a dead phone in one hand and the future in the other, the cursor hovering over the small blue button Publish, and 3 years of work behind it, and a Pulitzer behind that, and the man she loved on the far side of a single click. And she understood that there was no version of the next minute in which she did not lose something she could not bear to lose. She thought about the yellow building, the 11-legged dinosaur. 400 children eating breakfast in houses the cold hand hid behind 11 layers of crime, so no one could use them as a knife. She thought about a 5-year-old saying, "You found me." She thought about journalism and truth, and what the truth even was, and which of the two whispers in her own chest was the lie. And then Nora Walsh, the angel of the criminal, made her choice. She did not click the button. Not yet. First, she closed the document. And then she opened a new one, blank, white, infinite, the way every story starts. And she began, with shaking hands and a clear and terrible certainty, to write a different one. She wrote until the sun moved off the wall and Lily woke and Rosa took her for an early dinner. She wrote through the blue desert dusk. She wrote the way she had not written in years, not since before the marriage and the divorce and the grinding freelance hustle had turned her work into a product. She wrote because she had something true to say, and only she could say it. She did not lie. That was the thing she held on to, the line she would not cross, because she was a journalist, and the day she lied in print was the day she stopped being the woman Vincent had said he loved, exactly the size she was. She did not lie. Everything in the new story was true. She wrote about a casino empire built on the edges of the law. She wrote about a city's machinery and the men who'd bought it. She wrote about Vincent Calabrese, Mafia boss, casino owner, the man they called the Cold Hand, because he had not forgiven a soul in 19 years. She named the structures. She described the methods. She did not pretend he was clean. But she wrote about all of him. She wrote about a 19-year-old girl named Sophia, who had wanted to be a doctor for the children nobody wanted,
and a brother who'd held her hand in a hospital hallway while it went cold, and what that does to a man. She wrote about 12 homes and 400 children, and the 11 layers of shell companies built not to hide stolen wealth, but to hide generosity. Because in his world, the thing you love is the thing they take. She wrote, without naming herself, without navigation, Lily, protecting them even now, about a man who would turn an entire criminal underworld toward the rescue of a single frightened child, and ask for nothing in return. She wrote a portrait of a man more complex than she, or her readers, or the FBI, or the legend had ever imagined. A man who was both whispers at once, a monster and a guardian in the same skin, a criminal, and, in the one ledger that mattered to him, something close to an angel. And she wrote that the most honest thing she could say, after 30 days inside his house and his life, and, though she did not write this part, his heart, was that she no longer knew which side she was on. And that perhaps the not knowing was the truest thing of all, because human beings were not stories, and the day journalism forgot that was the day it became propaganda. She left out the wires. She left out the chapels. She left out the senator's name and the offshore structures and the names of the men and every single piece of hard evidence, the load-bearing facts, the ones a prosecutor needed, the ones that turned a profile into an indictment. She left out the gun. She kept the truth and removed the weapon, and she knew, as she did it, exactly what she was doing and exactly what it cost. It cost her the Pulitzer. It cost her the case of a generation. It cost her the version of Nora Walsh who had broken into a casino 31 days ago, certain she knew what justice was. And it was, without question, the best thing she had ever written. The best investigative report of her life. And the first one in which she did not know, walking away from it, whether she had done right or wrong. Only that she had done true. She finished it at midnight. She read it through once, and then she sat for a long time in the dark. She thought about clicking publish, about what it would mean, a brilliant, unkillable, unactionable portrait of a complicated man, a piece that would make her name not as the woman who got the cold hand, but as the journalist brave enough to refuse the easy story. It would run. Her editor would fight her on the missing evidence, and then, reading it, would stop fighting. Because some part of every good editor recognizes the moment a writer has touched something real. But that wasn't the choice that frightened her. The choice that frightened her was the other one. The one underneath. The one Vincent had handed her with the gun. Because she could still publish the other document. It was still there, in the trash, recoverable with 3 clicks. The full one. The one with the gun in it. She sat in the dark with both stories inside one machine and understood that this, not the terrace, not the kiss, not the motel room, this was the real fork in her life. And that whichever way she went, she would be a different woman on the other side of it, and she would never get to be the old one again. She opened her phone. She looked at V. She did not call. Some things you don't decide on a phone. Some things you decide with your whole body, walking down a long limestone hall toward a man on a terrace. Nora Walsh stood up, closed the laptop, both stories sleeping inside it, the gun and the portrait, the indictment and the truth, and walked out of the wing and down the long hall toward the terrace where she knew, with the certainty of 30 days of learned geography, she would find him keeping watch over the desert and the dark, and now her. She knew which story she was going to publish. She just needed to tell him in person. He was where she knew he'd be, the amber glass at his elbow, untouched, catching the last of the moon. His back to her, his shoulders set, a man waiting for a verdict, the way other men wait for a sunrise they're not sure they'll see. He didn't turn when she came out. He'd have heard her. He heard everything. But he didn't turn, and she understood that he was giving her the choice, even now, even in the angle of his own body, refusing to face her and make it harder, refusing right up to the last second to do the one thing he'd sworn he'd never do, which was beg. "I hung up," he said to the desert, hours ago. "I told myself I wouldn't call back, and I didn't. That was the hardest thing I've done since the hospital." A pause. "Have you done it?" "Turn around, Vincent." "Have you done it?" "Turn around." He turned, and whatever he saw in her face, the tear-streaked, exhausted, certain face of a woman who had made her choice, made him go very still. The stillness she'd learned to read, the stillness of a man bracing. "I didn't publish the story," Nora said. Something moved across his face. He killed it instantly, the iron discipline of 19 years. "Nora, we talked about this. You can't bury your work for me. I won't be the thing that makes you—" "I didn't bury it." She took a step toward him. "Listen to me. I'm a journalist, Vincent. I didn't bury anything. I wrote a different story, a true one, the truest thing I've ever written. About a casino empire and a city that got bought, and about a man named Vincent Calabrese, who is exactly as dangerous as the legends say, and who funds 12 orphanages with dirty money, and who hides 400 children behind 11 shell companies, because in his world, the thing you love is the thing they take. I wrote about Sophia. I wrote about the hospital hallway. I wrote about a man more complicated than anyone gave him credit for. And I wrote that I no longer know which side I'm on, and that the not knowing is the most honest thing in the whole piece." Another step. "I left out the evidence, the wires, the chapels, the names, the gun. I kept every true word, and I took out the only things a prosecutor could use. It's not enough to convict you. It was never going to be, after today. I made sure of it." Vincent stared at her. The cold hand. The man who never forgave, never bent, never once in 19 years let anyone see all the way in. "Why?" he said. It came out hoarse. "Because I didn't do it for love," Nora said, and this was the part she'd worked out in the dark, the part that mattered, the part that let her live with herself. "I want you to understand that, because I think you'd hate it if I'd done it for love. You'd think you'd made me smaller, the way you said. I didn't do it for love. I did it because I spent 30 days looking for the truth, and the truth turned out to be more complicated than the gun. The truth is a man who is both things at once, and a journalist who buries that truth to fit it into a tidy story about a monster is a coward and a liar, and I am neither. The full report would have been a lie of omission in the opposite direction. It would have left out the orphanages and the hospital and Sophia and everything that makes you a man instead of a headline. That would have been the dishonest story. The one I wrote is the honest one. It just happens to also be the one that doesn't put you in a cell." She was crying again, and smiling through it, the way she had on the terrace 2 weeks ago. "So no, I didn't do it for love. I did it for the truth. The love is just—" Her voice caught. "The love is just why I'm out here on this terrace, telling you in person, instead of letting you read it in the morning, like everyone else."
For a long moment, Vincent Calabrese did not move, did not speak. Stood in the moonlight with 30 days and 19 years and a whole frozen life behind his eyes, looking at the woman who had knelt in his blood and ordered him to live, and then refused to put him in the ground when she had every reason and every right. And then the cold hand crossed the terrace in 3 strides and took Nora Walsh's face in both his hands and kissed her, like a man surfacing from deep water, like a man who has been holding his breath for 19 years and has finally been allowed to breathe. And she felt the wetness on his face and knew it wasn't hers. "I had a speech," he murmured against her mouth. "I had a whole speech ready, for if you'd published it. About how I deserved it, how I'd go quietly, how I'd protect you and Lily from anything that came after. I rehearsed it for hours." A broken laugh. "I didn't have a speech for this. I never let myself write one. I didn't dare." "Improvise," Nora whispered. So he did. He said the only thing that was left, the thing under all the others, the simplest and most dangerous truth he owned. "Stay," Vincent Calabrese said. "Day 30's over. The deal's done. You're free. You can take Lily and the story and walk out that gate tonight, and I'll have men make sure you're safe for the rest of your life. No strings, no debt. The ledger closed clean. You're free, Nora. That's what I'm offering you. Your freedom." His hands tightened on her face. "And then I'm asking you, freely, for the first time in my life, asking and not arranging, stay. Stay anyway. Be a catastrophe with me. Both of you. Stay." She stayed. Not in the fortress on Red Rock. That was the first thing they changed, both of them understanding that a house built to hold things at bay was no place to raise a small person who liked to build towers and swim 3 strokes and ask sad castles why they were sad. And not, in the end, in Las Vegas at all. The story ran 3 weeks later. It detonated, but not the way anyone had braced for. There was no indictment. There was nothing in it a prosecutor could hold. But there was something the prosecutors had never managed in 11 years and $40 million. There was the truth, whole and complicated and human, and it did more damage to the legend of the cold hand than any conviction could have. Because a monster the city could understand. A monster they could fear cleanly, but a man who funded orphanages and held his dying sister's hand and turned a criminal empire toward the rescue of a child. A man could not be feared cleanly, and an empire built on clean fear does not survive its boss becoming complicated. Nora Walsh, who had set out to imprison Vincent Calabrese, had done something stranger and more permanent. She had made him human, in print, forever. And a human cannot be a king of shadows. He'd known. Of course he'd known. She understood later that it was the other thing he'd handed her along with the gun, that the honest story would cost him his throne as surely as the evidence would have cost him his freedom, just slower, just gentler, and that he'd chosen it on purpose. That when he said, "I'm tired," he had meant it all the way down. He got out. It took the better part of a year. An empire is not a coat you simply take off. And there were debts to settle and successions to manage, and a great deal of money to move quietly into the 12 homes and a foundation that bore a dead girl's name. Until the day came when there was nothing left tying Vincent Calabrese to the city that had made him cold.
Marco wept and called him a fool and embraced him and took over what was left, and that was its own kind of ending, the only kind that world allows. The day they left, Lily put Mr. Bubbles in her own backpack and refused all help carrying it. And at the airport she held one of Nora's hands and one of Vincent's, and the three of them walked toward the gate, looking, to anyone who passed, like exactly what they had somehow, impossibly, become. Rome did not know the cold hand. That was the gift of it. In Rome he was simply a man, tall, quiet, with a jaw that had been broken once and reset wrong, who walked the cobbled streets of Trastevere in the early evening with a 5-year-old on his shoulders and a woman beside him who was forever stopping to write things in a small notebook. The Romans took them for what they appeared to be. No one crossed the street when he passed. No one's eyes went down. For the first time in 19 years, Vincent Calabrese walked through a city and no one was afraid of him. And Nora watched the weight of it come off him by degrees, week after week, like a man surfacing slowly from a great depth, so the pressure won't kill him. They rented an apartment first, then bought one. Top floor of an ochre palazzo with a terrace, because of course there was a terrace. He would always need a terrace, would always need somewhere to stand at night and keep watch. But the watching changed too over the months, from a soldier's vigilance to something softer. A man simply looking at the lights of a city he was learning to love because it had let him be no one. Nora wrote. Freelance still, but different work now. The work she'd meant to do before the world ground her down. Long pieces, true ones, about complicated people. She never wrote about him again. That story was finished. She'd said everything true she had to say, and the rest was theirs, and the rest was not for print. Lily started school. She learned Italian faster than either of them, the way children do, and came home with new words and grass stains and friends whose names Nora couldn't pronounce. And she called Vincent by his name for a while, and then, one ordinary Tuesday over breakfast, did not. And the new word she used instead made the most dangerous man in the history of Las Vegas put down his coffee and leave the room and stand on the terrace for a long time with his back to them. And when he came back, his eyes were red, and no one said anything about it. Because some things you don't say out loud. And some silences are the loudest love there is. The 12 homes still ran. He'd made sure of it before he left. The foundation, the quiet money, the structures rebuilt, clean now, legitimate. A dead girl's name on a charity that would outlive them all. Sometimes a letter came, forwarded through a chain of addresses, a child's drawing, an 11-legged dinosaur, a photograph of a yellow building full of kids eating breakfast. He kept them in a box. He thought Nora didn't know. She knew. On a night near the end of their first year, they stood on the terrace in Rome, with the city spread gold below them, Lily asleep inside with Mr. Bubbles, and Vincent had a glass of wine at his elbow that he had, for once, actually been drinking, because there was nothing left in him that needed to stay sharp. "Do you ever wonder," Nora said, "what would have happened if I'd clicked the button?" "No," Vincent said. "Liar." He almost smiled. "Every day." For about a second. "And then I look at this." A gesture, the terrace, the city, the dark window behind which a small person slept. "And I stop wondering, because there's no version of that button that ends here, and here is the only place I've ever wanted to be." He turned to look at her. "Do you wonder? About the Pulitzer?
The story you didn't write. Nora considered it honestly, the way she considered everything now. I wrote a better one, she said. It just wasn't the one that wins prizes. It was the one that was true. And it was the first time in my whole career I finished a piece and didn't know which side I was on. She leaned into him, and his arm came around her, the hand that had been cold for 19 years, warm now against her shoulder. I used to think that was a failure, not knowing.
I thought a good journalist always knew which side she was on. And now? Now I think anybody who's always sure which side they're on isn't paying attention, Nora said. People aren't sides, Vincent. They're both whispers at once, he said quietly. Both whispers at once. The city breathed below them, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere a church bell counted the hour. Inside, a 5-year-old turned over in her sleep and clutched an otter named Mr. Bubbles, safe behind no walls at all, because the only fortress she needed now was the 2 people on the terrace, who had each given up the thing they thought they could not live without, a throne, a prize, and discovered to their endless astonishment that they could. I never begged anyone, Vincent murmured into her hair. My whole life, not once. I know. I'm going to beg you for one thing, just one, the only one I'll ever ask for. Nora went still. What? Don't ever leave this terrace, he said. Not really. Wherever we are, whatever city, just be the woman who stays. That's all. That's the whole prayer. And Nora Walsh, the angel of the criminal, the journalist who had buried the gun and kept the truth, looked out over Rome with the man she had refused to put in the ground, and gave him the only answer either of them had ever needed. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I already chose. I'm staying. And she did. Years later, because there were years, more of them than either had dared to count on, a young journalist came to Rome. She was good. The quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind Nora had been at her age. She was writing a piece about the old days, the Vegas families, the empires that had risen and broken on the desert. And her research had led her through a chain of old filings and shell companies, and one persistent thread she couldn't quite let go of, to a name that the record said had simply vanished one year and never resurfaced. Vincent Calabrese. The Cold Hand. And it had led her, somehow, to a long-retired investigative journalist named Nora Walsh, who lived in a top-floor apartment in Trastevere with a terrace and a great many books and a teenage daughter who was rarely home anymore, and who agreed, to the young woman's surprise, to talk. They sat on the terrace. Nora poured wine. The young journalist set a recorder on the table between them. Nora looked at it for a long moment, and something crossed her face, some private weather gone before it could be read. And then the young woman began to ask her questions. You wrote the famous piece, she said. The Calabrese profile, the one everybody studies in school now, the one that... I mean, no offence, but it's infamous, right? Because you clearly had more. Everybody's always said you must have had more. The evidence to convict him, and you didn't use it. Half the professors say it was the bravest piece of journalism of the decade, and half of them say you sold out, that you fell for him, that you... She stopped, suddenly aware she'd gone too far. Sorry, I've always wanted to ask you. Why?
Why didn't you publish what you had?
Nora Walsh looked out over Rome, the same gold city, older now, as was she. "What makes you think I had more?" she asked mildly. "Everybody knows you did. You lived in his house for a month. You had access no one's ever had. There's no way you didn't have the evidence to bury him." The young woman leaned forward, the hunger in her unmistakable, the hunger Nora remembered like a phantom limb. "So why, after all these years, off the record if you want, why didn't you click the button?" And Nora Walsh, who had won no Pulitzer, who had buried the gun and kept the truth, who had spent the best years of her life on a terrace with a man no one in this city had ever feared, smiled the smile of a woman who knows something the young can't be told, only lived into. "I'll tell you what I learned," she said. "The thing it took me 30 days and the rest of my life to understand. You came here wanting to know which side I was on, the reporter's side or the criminal's, the truth or the love. You think it's a button, publish, don't publish, one side or the other, and a real journalist always knows which." She shook her head slowly. "People aren't sides, sweetheart. The man I knew funded 12 orphanages with stolen money and held his dying sister's hand and turned an entire criminal underworld towards saving a frightened child. And also did things I'll never write down and he'd never have undone. Both, at once, in the same skin. And the day I understood that no story is true if it leaves out half the man, that's the day I became a real journalist. Not the day I learned to find the evidence. The day I learned which evidence told the truth and which only told the story." The young woman frowned, scribbling, not yet understanding, too young to understand. "But the man himself, Calabrese, whatever happened to him? The records just stop. Did he die? Did he run? Is he—" A door opened behind them. An old man came out onto the terrace. Tall still, though stooped now with the years, with a jaw that had been broken once a lifetime ago and reset wrong, and dark eyes gone soft and brown at last, all the cold, long, melted out of them. He carried 2 cups of coffee, and he set one in front of Nora without a word, the way he had set a glass of water in front of a frightened mother a lifetime ago, and his hand brushed her shoulder as he straightened. Warm, that hand, warm now, and for all these years the cold gone out of it the night a journalist knelt in his blood and refused to let him die. "You'll have to forgive my wife," he said to the young journalist, his voice still quiet, still gentle, still the voice that read the world like a bedtime story. "She gets philosophical on the terrace. It's the wine. And the view." He lowered himself into the 3rd chair with a small grunt and looked at the recorder on the table and then at the young woman's notebook and then, with vast and ancient amusement, at Nora. "Another one," he said. "Another journalist, after all these years." "After all these years," Nora agreed. The old man picked up his coffee. He looked out at Rome, at the gold and the bells and the long, slow evening, at the woman beside him and the box of children's drawings in the apartment behind them, and the whole impossible, improbable life he had been given, instead of the one he'd earned. "Tell her the truth," he said softly. "You always do. It's the only thing I ever loved you for." A pause. The old joke, the old tenderness. Well, not the only thing. And the young journalist looked from one of them to the other, the old killer and the woman who'd saved him, the criminal and his angel, and felt the story she'd come for dissolve in her hands and reassemble into something else, something larger and stranger and truer than the one she'd planned to write, and understood dimly that she had just been handed the kind of gift that ruins you, the kind that makes every tidy story you ever tell afterward feel like a lie. "I don't know which side to write it from," she admitted finally, helplessly. Nora Walsh reached across the table and took Vincent Calabrese's warm hand in hers, the way she had 30 days and 30 years ago on a marble floor in a city of liars in another life. "Good," she said. "Now you're a real journalist. Write it from there."